Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission. We are in day 2 of the hearing in docket number 2022-142-WS. This is the application of Daufuskie Island Utility Company Incorporated for a rate increase. Let's take a roll call of commissioners first. Appearing virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Present in the hearing room, we have Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, Chair Belser. I will note that Commissioner Justin Williams is on leave today and will not be participating in the remainder of the hearing. Let's see, we got some preliminary matters this morning. Before we get started, everybody jump up at one time.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
Chair Belser, I have the late filed hearing exhibit reserved as number 6, including the information regarding the employees on the island.
Okay. Have you distributed that to the other council?
I have.
Ah, bless you. If you'd hand it up to the court report and distribute to the commissioners, we would appreciate that. You're kind of blocked, so if you just want to hand up some, we can pass them down. Thank you. Anything else?
Only that we would like to take Ms. Multerry out of order first this morning.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gressett. Mr. Pringle.
Thank you, Chair Belser. Even though I feel obligated to respond to the late filed exhibit, I won't. The question is, amongst the parties, is whether or not the commission could, if it...
Are you talking about the schedule for today?
That would be correct.
I was getting ready to address that.
Okay.
Do you want to go ahead or you want me to go ahead?
No, please proceed.
We do have a commission business meeting that has been noticed for today at 2 o'clock. I would like to try to go as close to 1 o'clock as we could. That would give y'all time for a decent lunch. I anticipate that we would be ready. We don't have a huge agenda today, but I think for safety reasons or just to give us plenty of time, we will say 2:45 to resume. So that'll be a little longer lunch than normal, but that's the plan. We'll take a mid-morning break and then try to go to as close to 1 o'clock, a little before, a little after as we can. Does that help?
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Knowles?
Thank you, Chair Belser. I just had one item which had raised with Mr. Stark this morning with all the parties. It would be ORS's preference that the management agreement that Mr. Guastella had requested approval of from the stand yesterday just be filed in a separate docket and request for approval sought in that docket along the lines of how similar management agreements have been treated in the past. I understand that Counsel for DIUC is amenable to this approach. And so I just wanted to raise that with the commission as a preliminary matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Knowles. Mr. Gressett, is that accurately stated?
Yes, ma'am. If the commission prefers we handle it that way, we're happy to.
Okay. I think that would be the appropriate way to handle that. So we'll look forward to that later filing. Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Thank you, Mr. Gressett. Anything further from council before we begin? Okay. Mr. Gressett, please call your first witness.
Thank you, Chair Belser. The applicant calls Carrie Multerry.
And I believe Ms. Multerry is virtual. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Good morning, Ms. Multerry. Excuse me.
Good morning.
You can hear us okay?
I sure can.
I'm going to ask you to state your name.
My name is Carrie Multerry.
I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand and let me administer the oath to you. Do you solemnly affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. You may lower your hand, and Mr. Gressett, you may proceed.
Thank you. Ms. Multerry, can you state your full name for the record?
My full name is Carrie Lynn Multerry.
And are you employed, Ms. Multerry?
Yes, I am.
And where are you employed?
Guastella Associates.
And as part of your employment with Guastella Associates, have you prepared pre-filed testimony for this matter?
Yes, I have.
And does that testimony consist of 2 pages along with 1 appendix?
That's correct.
And if we were to ask you those questions here today, would your answers remain the same?
Yes, they would.
Okay. At this time, we would move the pre-filed testimony of Ms. Multerry be entered into the record along with the appendix.
Ms. Multerry's rebuttal. I'm sorry.
Direct testimony.
Direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Ms. Multerry's Appendix A will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 7 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Ms. Multerry, your testimony references preparation of billing analysis. Can you just briefly describe that effort for the commission?
Yes, I do the day-to-day accounting for DIUC, generating the bills quarterly, collecting any of the payments, keeping the books and records.
And did you prepare the Schedule Es that are included within the application in this case?
I provided the billing, all of the billing data to Mr. White, and he prepared the Schedule Es, but I provided all of the billing data to him.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Gressett. Y'all bear with me a minute. I'm just a little bit discombobulated for some reason. Department of Consumer Affairs, any cross?
No questions, thank you.
Homeowners associations?
No questions from the POAs.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle. Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for Ms. Multerry?
Madam Chair,
Vice Chair Powers?
thank you. And good morning, Ms. Multerry.
Good morning.
Just a couple of questions. Is all your work done from the Florida office?
That is correct.
Okay, do you ever travel to Daufuskie or have to go there for any reason?
I have not yet, but if I needed to, I would.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Caston?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Sorry, looking for my questions here. Ms. Moultrie, thank you again this morning for appearing. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
In your Appendix A of, I think, your direct testimony, you state you do full cycle accounting for water and sewer utilities, including billing for customers, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and account reconciliation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
How many water and wastewater utilities do you currently provide these services for?
2.
2. Do you know about how many hours, say a day or a week, you would spend working on Daufuskie?
In a day, I would say anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, depending on the day.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. How many?
Anywhere from 4 to 6, 4 to 8 hours a day, depending on what's going on that day.
I appreciate it. Thank you, ma'am. I have no more questions.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioners, any further questions? Hearing none, any redirect?
No, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Multerry, thank you for your testimony today. You may stand down from the witness stand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gressett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, I would like to call the remaining witness from yesterday's botched panel, Mr. Gary White. Thank you for your patience.
Mr. White, we're on a new day, and since you didn't get to testify yesterday. Let's just swear you in again, if you don't mind. Would you kindly
don't mind
raise,
at all.
would you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, Mr. White. Go ahead.
Morning, Mr. White.
Good morning, Mr. Gressett.
Can you, for purposes of the record, state your full name, please?
My name is Gary C. White.
And where are you employed, Mr. White?
I'm employed at Guastella Associates.
And how long have you been employed with Guastella Associates?
Oh, in excess of 30 years. I think about 34 years.
And in your work with Guastella Associates, do you have personal knowledge of the operations of Daufuskie Island Utility?
Yes,
And did you participate in the preparation of any materials for the application for rate increase that initiated this matter?
I did.
And are your efforts described in your pre-filed testimony?
Yes, they are. They're detailed in that in the pre-filed testimony, along with the. I'm sorry. Yes.
And am I correct that that pre-filed testimony consists of 10 pages of direct testimony dated September 1?
That's correct.
And does that testimony reference the schedules filed with the original application?
It does.
Did you prepare those schedules filed with the original application?
I did. I prepared all the schedules in support of the application.
Okay. And did you file rebuttal testimony in this matter?
I did that as well.
Okay. And along with your rebuttal testimony, did you submit 2 exhibits?
I submitted 3 exhibits, I believe.
And if I were to ask you each of the questions in that direct and rebuttal testimony today, would your answers be the same?
My answers would be the same. However, I did find a typo on Schedule A4 of rebuttal exhibits GCW-1.
Okay. And what is that typo, sir?
That typo is, on that schedule that I prepared, I put the company's rebuttal position, the ORS's position, the proposed position, and the as-filed proposed position of each for the financial statements. The operating statement, excuse me. And the typo exists in the column that says as-filed proposal. Under revenue increase, my typo says 47.6% was the as-filed increase, and that's incorrect. It was 46.3%. So that percent would change from 47.6 to 46.3.
And have you made that correction on an isolated page of that exhibit?
I certainly have.
And is that document next to you
It
with the
is.
change marked in red
Yes,
and bearing your initials?
yes.
We'll handle this at the chair's pleasure, Your Honor. We could submit that. We could submit it as a later filed exhibit. I'm also happy to prepare copies for the commission and provide it after our next break.
Let's, we will receive that corrected page as a separate hearing exhibit. And if you could, have you just told, previously, have you told other counsel about that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is there any objection to that correction? Hearing none, we'll reserve, let's get his exhibits in, and then we'll reserve the next exhibit after that one. How about that?
Thank you. 1 and then 3 with the rebuttal. Subject to that change, Mr. White, is everything else in your pre-filed direct testimony with exhibits and your rebuttal testimony with exhibits correct and accurate to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
Okay, at this time, the applicant would move the admission of Mr. White's testimony into the record as if read orally from the stand along with the exhibits.
Mr. White's direct pre-filed testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Mr. White's rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Mr. White's rebuttal exhibits, which I believe are GCW 1, 2, and 3, will be marked as hearing exhibit number 8 and received into the evidence of this case. We will reserve hearing exhibit 9 for the corrected page from GCW1 Schedule A4. Would you please note on that it is corrected somewhere? I understand it's in red and he's initialed it, but we could just have corrected on there somewhere.
Certainly.
Thank you. Does that cover everything you want in the record?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. White, could you briefly provide the commission with a summary of the tasks you've performed for this application proceeding?
Yes, in conjunction with Mr. Guastello, with clerical staff, and with the operating staff at Daufuskie Island, I prepared these schedules in support of the rate filing.
And to the best of your knowledge, the calculations included in those materials are accurate and correct?
Correct.
Okay. In your pre-filed rebuttal testimony, do you recall discussing the issue of inflation?
I do.
Can you briefly summarize the utilities position with regard to inflation adjustments in this matter?
Sure. What I did was I applied inflation to 4 categories of expense. Those categories being power, chemicals, materials and supplies, and transportation. I went to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. Labor Bureau statistics on the internet, and looked up what they suggested for pricing increases that would occur going forward from 2021.
And
the costs that we used in the rate filing were 2021. I applied these pricing increases to those 4 categories on a pro forma basis.
And are those 4 adjustments noted in Schedule WC1?
They are.
And am I correct that well, if you would, tell the commission the percentages that you used for each of those categories and the source of that information.
Okay, the first increase was to power. I went to the U.S. Bureau of Labor statistical percentages, and they stated that 11% would be the pro forma going forward pricing increase for electric power. These are really become known and measurable changes because, as we all know, inflation this year is much higher than it's been in the past. So I think that, inflationary adjustments are certainly appropriate, and certainly more appropriate in this environment, and economic environment, than it has certainly in the past 10 to 15 years. The next adjustment, inflationary pricing adjustment, was made to chemicals. I used 9.7, which was stated in the same statistical categories that the U.S. Bureau of Labor provides. This was for commodities, less food and energy. So that was a percentage used for those types of commodities. The next was supplies and maintenance. I actually went to the South Atlantic region, which is specified in their statistical information, and that stated that 8.8% was the pricing increase for 2002 pricing. And the last was for transportation. And again, we all know our fuel prices have gone up substantially. But overall, the U.S. Bureau of Labor said that 8.5% on all transportation and associated costs would be the pricing inflator for 2022. 2022, excuse me.
And was the adjustment and South Atlantic Region Bureau of Labor 8.8% also for 2022?
Yes.
Mr. White, would you give the commission a little of your employment history and background relevant to the work you performed in this case?
Sure. I started actually in the utility industry back in 1984. I worked for the largest land property developer in the state of Florida for a period of about 5 years. I headed their rate and regulation department of their utility division. After that, I decided to move on, and actually, Mr. Guastella was one of the consultants I used for my rate department for that land development company and real estate development. And so John and I had become familiar with each other's work. And when I decided to move on, I called John and said, John, it says Guastella and Associates. How about another associate? So John said, fine, I have a job for you. I want you to come to upstate New York and manage the day-to-day operations of a utility company. I thought, what a valuable experience that would be, to spend every day working with the customers, working with the operations, and a great education. So I took the job with John. The company that I was managing ultimately got sold to the local town, and I then became a consultant with Guastella Associates. And like I said, I think that goes back to 1991 or 2.
And since 1992, have you testified in rate case proceedings before regulatory commissions?
I have.
How many?
I've testified before and been declared an expert witness, and I'm going to say upward of 10 states. I've probably given testimony in close to 40, probably 40 hearings, 40 to 50 hearings.
After the utility received the initial testimony and exhibits from ORS, did you engage in any additional work?
I did. I examined the ORS's position and we accepted many of their positions and rejected a few. I think Mr. Guastella has touched on most of them. Inflation adjustment was one, of course. Rate case expense for the reparations being excluded from the cost for this proceeding was another. Eliminating the unamortized balance of prepaid expenses from rate base was another. And the biggest one, of course, is trying to settle that plant and service original cost that ORS has eliminated on the basis of it's undocumented.
And did you create any schedules based upon those adjustments you just addressed?
I did. If in my exhibits, schedules WB.2 and WB.3 SB.2 and SB.3 outline the starting point that we have per books, the adjustments made or proposed by ORS, and then I have those that we accept and those that we reject to come up with what I would recommend as plant and service and accumulated depreciation numbers.
And
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you give me those schedule
Yes,
letters
ma'am.
again? I think my tab
It's,
fell off.
again, it goes back to my rebuttal exhibit GCW1. The schedules are Schedule B dash, I'm sorry, Schedule W-B.2 and W-B.3. And there's one for water and one for sewer, so.
just so we have it clear, the references to schedules included in your rebuttal exhibit W Walker B Bobby .2-2.
Just .2.
Okay. And the same WB.3.
Correct.
Okay. And included within your exhibits, is there any comparison of the positions outlined in the testimony of ORS to the positions of the applicant?
Yes, as I previously mentioned, again, in rebuttal exhibit GCW-1, Schedule A4 compares our rebuttal position with ORS's original proposal and the as-filed company proposal.
So if we look at the last three columns, can you identify the numbers by category included in each of them? What is the pro forma revenue requirement?
Our pro forma revenue requirement for our rebuttal position is $3,165,652.
And are the numbers in that column the result of your calculations based on the applicant's acceptance of adjustments since the filing of the application?
Yes, what I did was I started with the ORS recommendations and added back those points that we objected to, those costs that we objected to.
Okay. And is column 2 intended to show the ORS position as expressed prior to your rebuttal?
That's correct.
Okay. And the as-filed proposal, what are the numbers in that column?
Those are the numbers that were filed in the application, original application.
Okay. And as a result of your calculations after receipt of the testimony from ORS, what is the total revenue increase DIUC requests?
$1,578,000.
And can you direct the commission to where that appears on A4?
It's under the pro forma adjustment column under the total revenues. Which is the fourth column, mid-column on the schedule.
In the pro forma revenue requirement column,
In the pro forma adjustments column,
I see.
the fourth column over,
Fourth column over, line under
the adjustment to
total.
revenue
Okay.
would be $1,578,000.
Okay. Does that translate to a percentage increase?
It does, 46.2.
And is that reflected near the bottom of the page?
It's reflected on the bottom of the page on the line item called revenue increase.
All right. And what return on equity does this company request?
Return on equity of 10.5%.
And what rate of return does the company request?
Our rebuttal position is a return of 9.05% overall return.
And are those numbers shown on Schedule A3?
They are.
That's all the questions we have, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Gressett. Department of Consumer Affairs?
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Pringle? Excuse me, Intervenor Homeowner Associations.
You can call me whatever you want to, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. White.
Good morning, Mr. Pringle.
Anybody ever make reference to you as a character from Reservoir Dogs?
No, sir, they have not. You're the first.
How about Breaking Bad?
You're the first.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll leave that one alone. We both were here the entire day yesterday, weren't we?
Yes, we were.
And you were sitting right next to Mr. Costello throughout his testimony?
I was.
Okay. I'm gonna put on the screen and then adjust for zooming and such, your rebuttal exhibit GCW 2. I'll zoom it up a bit. Tell me, first, can you identify that?
Yes, that's a summary of updated rate case expenses.
Okay, and this is part of your rebuttal testimony.
Correct.
Okay. And you talked a little bit about this with Mr. Gressett, although this might not have been, you might not have been talking about this particular document, but this document has several columns, doesn't it?
Certainly does.
Okay. It's got one column that's the leftmost column, which is that correct? What was in your application, the company's application in terms of rate case expenses?
Correct.
And then in the middle, you've got some ORS adjustments to those rate case expenses.
Correct.
And then the rightmost column would be DIUC rebuttal adjustments,
Correct.
meaning that in your rebuttal testimony, you made determinations which ones you were going to keep and which ones you were going to throw back in terms of ORS adjustments, or which ones you'd accept and which ones you would not accept, right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, let's just talk about your rebuttal totals there, that rightmost column.
Okay.
You recall we had some conversation yesterday about $248,270. Those were are they not, unamortized rate case expenses from the previous rate case?
That's correct. They're unrecovered, remaining unrecovered costs from the amortization of those rate case expenses.
Okay, and those are in this rate case because the parties agreed that they could be considered in this rate case, correct?
Well, they were unrecovered through the rates in the from the previous case. So yes, we carry them forward.
Okay, and it's part of a sum total that you do over here in that column and in all of those columns, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's one, for lack of a better term,
Bucket.
that's part of a bucket.
Yes.
And then also you include what's referred to here as post-settlement legal, which is on the left side and then reflected throughout, correct?
Correct.
All right, and that total, $992,682. Oh no, wait a minute. is that the total 992, 682? Is that the total? What does that figure represent?
That figure represents rate case expense costs that occurred after the settlement or beyond the settlement amount of $52,000 or whatever that number was.
Okay.
I don't recall.
And the 992, 682 doesn't include the 248.70, or does it?
It was part of that number, but that's, we've amortized or collected from the customer, in theory, all but $248,000. That 248 is brought forward.
Sure.
So that we can recover it through the rates of this case.
My question's a little bit more specific and mundane, just because I frankly can't even add. My question is you sum up four numbers to get 992, 682 there?
Yeah, excuse me, I misunderstood
Okay.
your question.
It was a bad question, to be fair.
The 992 does not include the 248, 270.
Okay.
That's a separate bucket, so
Right.
to speak.
And you mentioned that those are post-settlement. So is it correct that those are the legal expenses and the Guastella and Associates expenses associated with what we've been talking about as the reparations request?
No.
Okay. Tell me what those comprise.
They do include some of the reparations costs, but those are costs that was agreed to be deferred until this case. They were part of the original docket 214-346-WS.
Okay, what's that total of that number, that discrete number? Do you know it?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Well, I'm asking if some of those rate case expenses were associated with the reparations requests, and some of them were unrecovered rate case expenses from the previous rate case, can you separate those out for me?
According to ORS staff's exclusion of reparation costs, there were, let's see, $78,586 of reparation costs for legal and $140,442 for Guastella Associates included in those costs.
Okay, and where I'm pointing here, the ORS excluded about $304,000.
Well, they excluded $85,000 that were estimated cost to complete the reparation process. So they eliminated those as non-known and measurable, and the other two amounts that I previously mentioned were excluded as reparation costs, most of which were added back.
Right. Okay. So you added them back in. So in any event, you didn't take them out.
Excuse me. I did not add them back in. Mr. Sullivan added them back in. ORS staff added them back in as appropriate expenses that were experienced prior to these rates going into effect in 2021.
Okay, the ORS took out $304,000.
Correct, and they put back $186,371 as reparation costs appropriate to be recovered in this case.
So based upon those things, what's the total amount of reparations costs that's included in your rebuttal and that you're asking this commission to recover in rate case expenses?
The total is that, because I put back the difference that Mr. Sullivan eliminated, which was $5,733 of legal costs and $26,924 of Guastella Associates costs.
can you give me a number? Out of the 992,682, how much of those costs are rate case expenses associated with the reparations request at the commission or at the South Carolina Supreme Court?
It would be the 186,731 plus the 32,657.
186,371 plus
32,657.
Okay, so it's your testimony that the total amount that Guastella and Associates and Mr. Gressett's law firm spent on reparations at the commission and at the South Carolina Supreme Court is somewhere just north of $200,000?
That's through the end of June. There's been the next column over in those, the middle column of or the last column actually of the DIUC rebuttal adjustments of $55,388 is an updated cost for invoiced amounts covering June, July, and August. July, August, and September.
Okay, let me ask it this way, and it's the last time I'll ask. $992,682 are the total amount of rate case expenses post-settlement that the IUC seeks, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can you break that number down between, and give me the number that corresponds to unrecovered rate cases from the last case on one hand, and then the total number of reparations rate case expenses to come up with that total?
The reparations costs are $186,371 that ORS has accepted. I'm adding back $32,657, which is post settlement costs, and I'm adding to that $55,000 of reparations, $55,388 of updated costs.
Okay, so it's 186 plus 32 plus 55?
Correct.
Okay, so we're talking about roughly $274,000 or and some change.
Subject to check, yes.
Subject to check. Okay, so if I subtracted 270, that number, 274 and change, from 992,682, the remainder would be rate case expenses that were not recovered in the previous rate case?
And not associated with reparations, yes.
Okay, all right. So we'll just use 274. All right, and then as you talked about, there are the legal expenses or the rate case expenses that are associated with this docket, which in your column or in your rendering is about $384,561, correct?
That's correct, through the end of September.
Okay, so there's unamortized costs, the post-settlement costs in the previous rate case, and there's the rate case expenses in this case, correct?
Those are the three buckets.
Okay, the three buckets. I'm glad to hear one of your you guys use my term buckets too. Feels, and then that total, the unamortized total is about $1.6 million, right? A little bit more.
That's correct.
And a 3-year amortization schedule.
Correct.
Okay. And you were here. The company's position is that whatever those rate case expenses that are associated with the reparations request are appropriate for recovery in this docket?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle. Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioners?
I have a few
Commissioner Caston?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Tired of sitting in that chair yet?
Well, I was saying earlier, if I had your pillow behind me, I'd be much more comfortable. But I was told you weren't willing to give it up.
I would share it. In your bio, and I think from Mr. Costello's testimony too, you have previously, and I think you stated just a while ago, managed the day-to-day activities of a water utility.
I sure have, yes. I did that for approximately 4 years.
I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Drucker, but he once said that only what gets measured gets managed, or only what we measure, keep up with, is what gets managed. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And this isn't an absolute as far as the per gallons, but I was thinking actually last night, we were talking about the wells and such as that. And I was thinking about the things, at least from my perspective, that used to be important. But does DIUC, do you, someone keep up with like the production cost of water?
Wait. Yes. And let me just qualify that by saying no matter what supervisor is in charge, they don't know everything about every detail of an operation. When I was managing Country Knolls, I had an operator that I depended on to keep track of things like capacity, daily flows, peak hours. I would take note of those periodically, but I didn't know them off the top of my head, nor did I keep track of them on a day-to-day basis. That's his responsibility, not mine. So there are things that, you keep track of, certainly, you track over time, but it's not always off the top of your head and the knowledge that you have as a supervisor.
I understand. What metrics or measures do you or others at DIUC use to know how well or not well things are going? Whether that's in production, operations, maintenance, customer satisfaction, finances. How do you know, and I ask this more generally, but by what metrics does DIUC maintain, keep up with, have record of, so that they can measure how well we're doing or not doing?
Well, again, I think there are department heads, and we have people like Mike Guastella, who is in charge of supervising the operations of the utility. My job is basically the accounting, bookkeeping, billing, regulatory compliance issues. So, Carrie does the bookkeeping and billing on a day-to-day. I keep an eye, I periodically look at the results of her work. I look at the accounts receivable. I look at the accounts payable. So I look at the different accounts, and at least once a year, I audit to see that her numbers are accurate or whatever. So I also put together the annual reports in compliance, or with her help, her assistance. Same with all the regulatory reports for property taxes and other things.
You mentioned Mike, I assume that's Mike Gustella,
Yes.
and I was looking at the application. I think it's page 24 of 105, I'm not sure, but it's on the DHEC's compliance inspection report. They list Mike as the manager of Daufuskie Island Utility Company. And I think Mr. Gustella Sr., in a respectful way, Mr. Gustella Sr., is manager. And that's what I'm really trying to understand. Like, who's in charge of DIUC? Who's responsible for making sure that it's efficiently and economically ran and everything's up to snuff and such as that?
Well, Mr. Guastella is the president of Guastella Associates. We are the managers of the Daufuskie Island, so I guess if the buck stops anywhere, it would stop at his desk.
Okay. And kind of circling back to my metrics question, and there's no magic number, and I'm not trying to paint you in a corner, I promise you I'm not. I'm trying to understand.
I understand.
At least from my perspective, I had, say, 4 key metrics. I mean, there were a gazillion of them, but after a while, you're just looking at pages of numbers and stuff, and it's like, but there were like 4 or 5 key things that told me at a glance something's amiss or something not, or we're doing well, or why did that jump up? That. Relative to not just finances, but whether the system is being efficiently or economically run. What metrics like that, or are there metrics like that DIUC has, and is Mike keeping up with those? Does he have those? Does Mr. Costello? I mean,
I'm confident Mike has those.
do you know what they are?
It's not part of my responsibility. As I said before, I'm really responsible for the accounting and finance piece of the management team, not on the day-to-day operations or even the operations other than the billing piece of the operations, billing and accounting, that kind of thing,
So
compliance.
you're confident Mike has those, but the buck stops with Mr. Costello, and you're the finance, accounting, and everything else, but you don't really have a clue what the metrics are that tell you whether DIUC is doing good or not good.
It would just be speculative on my part.
Okay.
I could tell you that what I used when I managed Country Knolls, but I don't know, I don't have personal knowledge of the metrics that Mike uses or the operators are on site.
Only 4 of y'all. Y'all can't share that information?
No, I don't share
I understand.
day-to-day information with Mike. No, I don't.
If I were to pick up my phone now, which I'm not,
Okay.
and call 888-635-7878, who would answer the phone?
I believe in most cases, Carrie would answer that call.
So 888-635-7878 goes directly to Carrie.
She does the billing, and I think most of those calls go to billing.
So she's customer service for DIUC.
She acts as customer service. Most of the inquiries are billing inquiries. So Carrie addresses those inquiries.
I was going to say, if I call 843-247-3135, who is that? But I think I saw on the application, looking at the DHEC forms, if I'm correct, that is Mr. Eric Johansson. Is that correct?
I don't know what numbers go to who, basically. I mean, I don't have reason to call them. If
Well,
I
he-
need operations information, I generally call Michael.
Well, I think he's the emergency number.
I'm sorry?
I think that's listed as the emergency number.
There is a 24/7 emergency number that is an answering service that then gets to, relays the message to our operators if there's an issue.
So that's,
Again, that's my understanding.
might be, but I'm just looking at this DHEC compliance evaluation form, and it just lists 843-247-3135 for Mr. Eric Johansson, I guess his contact number. But on your bill, it lists that number as the emergency contact number. And they well may be one and the same. I mean, I don't know, but
Very well could be. I don't know personally either. I know that Eric is the head operator.
and he's on
Till-
24
till the
hour
onsite.
he's on 24-hour standby.
Probably is, yes. Probably is.
Also looking at this application, and it was mentioned by, I think, a couple of the witnesses. Page 17, I guess it would be 18 of the application, but basically what it is of the Consumer Confidence Report, and has the unregulated contaminants. You know, it lists sodium from 2020 with the reported level in parts per million, 13 average in parentheses. And the range, even though this is unregulated, is 12 to 14. What I was curious about, because it says 13 is average, do you know what the high and low levels for salinity are, or what?
Again, outside of my purview. I have no idea.
Do you know where the salinity is coming from? Do you
Excuse
know
me?
why the elevated salinity is there?
No, I don't. I do not.
If you live in Hilton Head, you blame it on Savannah. But that's neither here nor there. If salinity is a problem or becomes a problem, has DIUC been considering that, thinking ahead? What are the treatment options? How you do that?
Again, I only have secondhand knowledge, but it's my understanding that there have been studies done by DHEC and other organizations, I guess, that project the next 50 years of there not being a problem with salt in the water, in the aquifer. So that's the limit of my knowledge.
Okay. Well, according to this, there's already that. And,
According to
the CCR, and I guess the sampling that's done, there is elevated salinity, but I don't know, what the high number was or low number. It just gives an average, so it doesn't really tell us. But
again, I don't look at those reports. It's outside of my purview.
I think you mentioned in your in questioning from Mr. Gressett, that the utility that you and Mr. Gustella managed, I think in Saratoga, I think it was
Saratoga
Saratoga,
County.
upstate New York.
Yes, Saratoga County.
I think that's horse racing country, isn't
Sure is.
it? It was bought by the city. Is that correct?
The town of Clifton Park, yes.
Do you know what brought that about?
Yeah, I think what really brought that about is the fact that it's, it started as a developer-related utility. And once the density of the town got to be sufficient and the system got so large, the municipality decided that they wanted to take the water system over.
Were they satisfied with the service?
Oh, yeah.
They just thought they could do it better or just wanted to run it?
No, they didn't. I don't think they thought they could do it better. They interviewed me to take the job to supervise their utility. However, I chose not to do that, and I chose to become a consultant with John Guastella.
Understand. So in this late filed exhibit, which lists the operators and two other gentlemen, I think yesterday it was my understanding there were 4 certified operators, but I think according to this, there's 2. That's Mr. Eric R. Johansson and Mr. Timothy C. Salem. Is that correct?
Correct.
So do you know who the operator of record is?
The operator of record would be both those licensed operators.
If I've looked at this correctly, it says Mr. Johansson has a C-level license in as a water distribution operator, a D license as a water treatment operator, and a C biological wastewater operator level. Are you familiar with those levels?
No, not in South Carolina.
In South Carolina, A is the highest level you can get. D is the lowest level. And that's not meant in a derogatory sense. It's a step process. You come in as a trainee, you have a trainee permit, then you get training and have to pass a D license, then a C license, then a B license, and A license. And Mr. Salem has a D water distribution operation license, a D water treatment operator, and a training biological wastewater treatment. Is that correct?
I don't know what licenses Tim has.
Well, in this, I'm assuming that's it.
I wouldn't disagree with that exhibit.
And Mr. Johansson, as far as we know, is the standby number, and these are the 4 folks. I think my understanding are these the 4 people that are on island that take care of the day-to-day affairs.
It's my understanding, yes.
So if you make a call to the 888 number, it goes to Carrie. If you call the emergency number for a leak after hours or maybe before hours, it goes to, looks like Mr. Johansson. And these folks take care of the whole system.
As far as I know, they're the ones that take care of the complaints.
I appreciate it.
If it needs further assistance, I'm sure, I know that Mike Guastella gets involved in resolving the issues as well.
And where does Mike live?
Mike lives in Florida.
So if there's a major...
He makes trips to Daufuskie Island frequently.
Well, my personal experience has been bad things happen, your major leaks, Murphy's Law kicks in at the worst time possible. So there is that possibility, correct?
There's always that possibility, but we have very adequate operators on site.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. White. You've been very patient. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
And I also have extra pillows if you're interested.
No, that's quite all right. Thanks. I was
All
just
right.
being facetious.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about the EDIT, the deferred taxes, excess deferred taxes, and those concepts. Are those part of the accounting records that you are responsible for?
Yes.
Okay, and I was having a conversation yesterday with Mr. Costello about these items, and just trying to get a little more clarity here on this topic. He indicated that these were items that could be offset against other expenses. That's just not really an accounting concept that I've ever seen in rate making. You don't just take one account and offset it against another one. You have any thoughts, comments on that?
I do. In 30 plus years of utility rate setting, what you're granted is a level of return or a level of revenue through your rates. Those rates are comprised, and that level of revenue is comprised of many components of cost. And I agree with Mr. Guastella, and I have professed this since the day I learned anything about rate setting, that you can't look at one item and say this item changed and therefore the revenue requirement changes, because this item might go up. If you're granted a level of revenue covering multitudes of cost components, one goes up, one goes down, you don't change the level of revenue you were granted. The level of revenue is the level of revenue. And it gives you, regulation gives you the opportunity to earn that level. Most times because of many issues, but the major issue is regulatory lag. You file your rate filing in 2014. The costs have changed in 2021 from that 2014. Some have gone up, some have gone down. But you don't look at just one component of the entire revenue requirement and say, well, because that one went down, now you've got to refund money. Shouldn't work that way. Doesn't work that way in many jurisdictions. So I don't agree that it's the way to look at this issue now.
Okay, so are you responsible for the tax returns?
We have an outside accountant that does the tax returns. I do not do them.
Okay, are you responsible for bookkeeping for taxes, the accounting for income taxes, the accounting for deferred taxes?
I am.
Those concepts? Okay.
I am.
And I have, for some reason or another, just trying to think back about the Tax Cut Act and the change in the tax rate. And I just have a feeling that there was something in that law that related specifically to regulated utility accounting that indicated that those amounts that come from those excess deferred taxes do flow back to customers. Do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't recall the specifics of the language of the law.
Well, neither do I. That's just something that's in the back of my head, and I'm not permitted to, go outside the record and look things up. So I still don't know the answer to that question. My hope is that perhaps an ORS witness can help us kind of work through this that has some more detailed knowledge. But I guess my concern is that we've had a lot of other utilities, I won't say a lot, but other utilities that have come before us have seen fit to make these refunds based on this one point. And I don't think they're just doing it just for the fun of it. And my other concern is that if in fact there's something in the law that says you need to do that, the tax law, then you could be setting yourself up for trouble on a tax audit. And that further concern for me is that if this is something that you should have been handling correctly, but you didn't, then based on your management agreement, you still get to say, okay, tax audit, we didn't do it right, but Costello's going to bill the company more money. That's the why this concerns me. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just say that we have a licensed CPA that looks at our taxes, and if there was an issue with it, I would think that he would have notified us. I'm not a tax expert.
Okay. And so again, yesterday we talked some about the tax sale property and the problems that that's created for the company. Is the payment of property taxes under your supervision?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And so generally that's something that should be covered, I think, as part of the company Costello's monthly fee. It's just part of what you do. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And but now we have the issue of a lot of money being spent to resolve this problem. And I think I heard you just now say that property taxes are your responsibility. Is that correct?
That would fall under my responsibility.
Okay. And so generally when someone's responsible for something, if something goes wrong, they deal with it and fix it and take care of it at their own expense. That seems to me the proper thing to do. You might have a contract that says you get to bill more. Do you really think that's the right thing to do?
Well, when it was not the company's fault, Daufuske's fault, the tax people were mailing the tax bills and the notice to an incorrect address. We had no knowledge of any of that happening. So, we're trying to correct it now, but we had no prior knowledge that any of that was happening until we were informed that the property had been sold through a tax sale.
But it was your responsibility, correct?
My responsibility to pay the tax bills that we receive.
I would disagree. It's your responsibility to keep up with the property taxes. Let me just tell you a little experience that I had. Coincidentally, it relates to Daufuskie Island. I was invited to go to Daufuskie Island by some people that were looking to buy property on a tax sale. They found out just basically public records right there on the internet, easy to find. I've looked at those records myself for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of different companies, and for myself. It's an easy thing to do. If you're responsible for property taxes, I would say that's part of your responsibility. It's there on the website. It's either paid or not. It's easy to find. Takes a few minutes.
Easy for you to say, but if I have no reason to check the property tax rolls for the county, why would I do that? I have multiple. Daufuskie is not just my lone responsibility. I do consulting work for utilities throughout the country. So to say that I was negligent because I didn't check the county tax rolls on a regular basis, I think is an incorrect assumption and incorrect accusation.
It's not an accusation, it's a question, please.
To answer your question, no, I didn't check the tax rolls, and I don't. As a practical matter, I don't check the tax rolls.
Do you think that might be something, since you are responsible for property taxes, do you think that might be something that would be a wise thing to do?
Again, my responsibility is to make sure the tax bills we receive are paid, and I do that.
I would disagree. I think your responsibility is to make sure that the property taxes are paid.
You're
You don't
entitled
really
to
have to
disagree.
get you don't really have to get a bill to know that you have property taxes. It's not that hard to figure it out. You just disagree with me on that, I guess.
I disagree.
Okay.
I don't check. I mean, why would you check the tax rolls if you don't have a reason to believe there's an issue?
To be careful, perhaps.
Well, again, you know, shoulda, coulda, woulda, but in the practical day-to-day operation, I don't think I can be accused of negligence.
I'm not accusing you of negligence.
Well, that sounds like it.
Okay. Well, so now in the practical day-to-day, you're dealing with a problem that's taken a whole lot more time than if you'd have simply taken a look. So I would just ask that you consider in the future learning a little lesson here. I mean, you only have 2 counties in South Carolina. I know you have other companies, but you're getting paid to do that. It's part of the responsibility. That's my opinion. And I hope that you would just give this some consideration for the future.
I think I have probably done consulting work for upwards of 100 different utilities. This is the only instance where I found there was a tax sale due to a issue with not receiving proper tax bills from the county. So, I mean, 1 out of 100 chance. I don't know. I just don't feel like, I was negligent in my duties.
Okay. So as part of this proceeding, we've heard a lot about funds being advanced to Daufuskie Island Utility to cover bills by a variety of different people and variety of different entities. And so I'm just wondering, or how are those amounts reflected on the Daufuskie Island utility books?
They would be categorized as advances and a liability.
Okay. But they're not part of the debt recorded on the balance sheet for purposes of the capital structure.
No, they're not.
Do you think that that's the correct treatment?
Yes, because in theory, advances are a short-term loan or short-term liability. It's not part of the long-term capital structure.
So have these been outstanding for less than a year? Most of them, or not?
I would say in most cases they're less than a year.
And have these advances in part been made by owners of the company that are also equity investors, I guess you might say?
Yes.
Okay, I just question whether that's the proper accounting treatment for something that is invested on the debt side as opposed to on the equity side, which would, of course, impact your rate of return calculation.
Okay, I accept your question. I tell you how I handle it.
Okay. So let's see. On the exhibit GCW-2, there's a line item there that is labeled property tax amortization of $65,856. Can you tell me what that relates to?
I'm sorry, would you repeat what document you're looking at?
I'm looking at GCW-2.
Okay,
There's a line item near the bottom that says property tax amortization.
yes.
Can you please tell me what that's about?
Again, the, John mentioned it briefly yesterday, that the county failed to bill us proper property taxes for a period, and again, it's off the top of my head, from probably 2010 through 2014, I believe. Anyhow, they made arrangements to collect that money over time. So they gave us an 8-year period to pay back those back taxes that we weren't properly billed for. So that was an agreement, and that was handled in the last case, the 2014-346 case,
Okay.
and accepted by the commission and staff.
Okay. All right. Again, I guess that's another little property tax issue that just kind of popped out there that I think gives some credence or weight to my thinking of just checking into it a little bit better. That's just my thought. And I think you have expressed your thoughts. And if you have anything else to say, please go ahead.
No, I think I'm done addressing that issue.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Vice Chair Powers.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioner Power.
I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
And it just kind of hit me when Commissioner Thomas was questioning you. The $1 million or so or more that Mr. Costello says he's invested in the company itself without having any ownership interest, is that reflected in the debt in your capital structure?
No, that shows as an accounts payable. These are back bills that haven't been paid by the utility because of a cash flow issue.
Well, if they're back bills, and obviously some of that is more than a year,
Some of that is, yes.
why would that not be reflected in your debt?
Well, for one thing, it's interest free. We're not paying, the utility's not paying interest on it, and that's also between the stockholders and Mr. Guastella as far as the arrangement to get that money paid back.
Okay. So it's personal, it's not coming through Costello and Associates?
Excuse me?
The money, the $1 million, isn't coming out of Costello and Associates, it's coming out of Mr. Costello.
It's invoices that have not yet been paid by the utility.
And isn't that debt?
Well, all of payables is debt,
Okay.
but it's not used as a capital structure debt because it's not, there's no interest, there's no cost involved in that money.
Well, money has a time value, and that's $1
It
million
does, yes.
he's doing without.
It does, you're right.
Okay. And was that considered a loan to the owners, stockholders, or what?
It's never been considered a loan because it wasn't anticipated to not be paid back. I mean, it was, the anticipation was we would have sufficient cash flow to cover our bills.
Okay.
In this particular case, we had a cash flow shortage. John was willing to wait, Costello Associates, I should say, was willing to wait on payment for those issues, you know, those costs that were charged to the utility company.
Does the associates then hold a promissory note for the amount of this money?
Not to my knowledge.
No promissory note at all?
I don't know.
Commissioner Powers, can you please speak up a little bit?
I apologize. If there's no promissory note attached to a debt of about $1 million, why would it not be reflected in the company's capital structure?
I don't have personal knowledge of any agreement between Mr. Guastal and the stockholders.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. And following up here a little bit on Commissioner Powers' question. So again, it may be a zero-cost debt in terms of not paying interest and not earning interest, but if it is in fact debt, then if it were recorded as debt on the balance sheet, then that would impact your capital structure, which would impact the rate of return that you're requesting in this case. Is if it were recorded as debt, would that impact the balance sheet, and would that impact the rate of return that you're asking for in this case?
Again, in my 30-plus years experience in regulatory matters, I've never used an accounts payable account as part of my capital structure. This is an accounts payable that was anticipated to be paid back on a current basis and just hasn't because of cash flow issues.
Right, but at some point, something that was anticipated to be short-term becomes long-term, then would you not agree that that's something that should be at least given some thought, particularly when it's time to file a rate case and it could impact your rate of return request?
Again, in 30 years, I've never seen that happen, so no.
A lot of strange things happening in this case, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning. Good to see you
morning,
again.
Commissioner.
I am going to follow up on, maybe for the last time that we talked about it, the taxes that were not paid on that one particular piece of property. It sounds like there's more to the story in terms of Beaufort County's role that we may not know, that you may want to tell us. But before I give you that minute, I just wanted to say, as I listened to it, just, not as an accountant, but somebody who pays bills regularly, and bills like taxes come every year. If I didn't get a tax bill, I would feel some responsibility to figure out where it went, if I still own the property or I still owed that. So if you could address both the big picture as well as that kind of human nature, maybe accounting structure, if you paid it in 2010 and it didn't come in and there was a gap there, why wasn't it seen at that point and resolved?
Okay, I'll try to answer that as
Thank you.
well and briefly as I can. You have to see the big picture, and the big picture is this. We took control of managing the company in 2008. We received no bills for that particular site from the county. They were mailing those bills to the wrong address, so they were being lost. Now you also have to look at what a tax bill looks like. The tax bill looks like it gives you a parcel number. Mm-hmm. I don't have an idea what that parcel number is considered on the tax rolls. So if I'm missing it, I'm not aware of missing that bill. I mean, I assume that it's part of, another bill, or this parcel that's on this bill is actually the, it's very difficult to say, oops, we don't have a bill for the tower because it doesn't say that's the water tower. Gives me a parcel number. So, you know, it's easy to point a finger and say, gee, that's negligent, or gee, you should have known that. But in the big picture, it's very difficult to identify property tax bills when you're dealing with multiple parcels. So the bill was missing. Then when it went to a tax sale, they posted the tax sale to the wrong address, or notification of the wrong address. So, I mean, it was like out of the blue, all of a sudden hey, guess what? The property, the 0.3 acres or whatever it is, parcel that contains the water tower has been sold at a tax sale. It was new to us, news to us. Does that answer your question? I hope it answers your question.
I think it does. So timing wise, you all purchased Daniel Island Utility Company. Sorry, I knew I was going to do that. Daufuskie Island Utility Company in 2008. And
We started managing it.
started
We didn't
managing,
purchase
right. Started managing it in 2008. 2010 is when this tax sale happened?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. I have some other questions. This has to do with your rebuttal testimony, and in A3, and you may or may not need it, but would you address why the capital structure and the debt rate change occurred from the application in a big picture way?
Well, yes, I can address the capital structure. We calculated the effective interest rate in a slightly different way than staff did. And we didn't disagree with staff's calculation. It's okay. I mean,
Excuse me.
They're effective.
Excuse me. When you say staff, are you talking about Office of Regulatory Staff?
Yes.
Okay,
I'm
you
sorry.
realize that's a separate agency from the commission, so
Yes.
okay.
Okay.
Let's,
sorry.
I just want the record to be clear, please. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Office of Regulatory Staff did the calculation in a slightly different way. But it wasn't an unacceptable way, in our opinion. So we used their interest cost rate and disagreed with their equity cost rate. So we used our equity cost rate of 10.5, their interest cost rate. We also reduced the amount of debt that ORS staff used because it exceeded our actual booked debt. So we used our actual booked level of debt, and the once it's synchronized to the rate base amount of investment, used equity as the balance. So it changed the ratios slightly. Those ratios then applied to the cost rates give you a different rate of return.
And has the company done analysis to determine if it would make economic sense to take out more debt that is less costly than equity?
The company had trouble getting the level of debt that they've gotten because of their earnings record. So until we get the earnings record corrected and in a more appropriate level of return, earn a more appropriate level of return, the banks are not going to give us future debt, more debt.
Thank you. And also in your rebuttal testimony, in the discussion on inflation adjustment, is it fair to say that while inflation rates are high currently, they could change in the next year and be lower?
It's fair to say that, but all indications, economic indications, are that there's no quick fix to the inflationary rates we're experiencing now.
Okay. And Daufuske's rates will be based on what's set in this case. So if inflation goes back down or goes even higher, or let's say it goes down and we allow the adjustment that you're asking, then it's going to be embedded in your rates.
Correct.
And, okay, correct.
But again, if you look at the resulting earnings every year, as long as we don't exceed the earnings that are allowed and the return that's allowed, it should become it's a non-issue. We wouldn't refund if the inflation goes down.
When can Daufuskie file another rate case if inflation were impactful?
When the earnings level starts to decrease far below what we were authorized to earn, we would file another rate increase.
Once the deferred expenses are fully paid, will that be another source of income?
Again, if we are not over earning what we were authorized to earn, then it's a non-issue. And realistically, Commissioner, that's a relatively small dollar amount because it's just the revenue. If it's in rate base, the unamortized balances are earning at a rate of 9%, or it's costing 9%. The carrying cost or the value, time value of money, which is the return. So it becomes a small amount. The unamortized balance, it becomes a small revenue requirement.
Would you agree that it is the responsibility of management to efficiently and effectively manage the company to provide economic service to customers?
Oh, yes.
Would you say that Guastella and Associates contract with DIUC results in the most economic method of financing rate case expenses?
I would say yes.
Has Guastella and Associates ever considered, given the cost of these rate cases, whether it would be more affordable to do it with outside resources? Wait, I asked the wrong question. Whether it would be more affordable to have a dedicated person within the Guastella and Associates managing this rate cases.
A single person as opposed to working with.
I don't mean that literally, but just an internal person as opposed to the expenses that you've incurred going outside.
I think that's the situation, actually. I mean, I put together these schedules and I basically do the math. But it's in concert with clerical people, operational people, Mr. Guastella. So I think that's as efficient as you can be.
Okay. In your testimony, you talk some about knowledge of daily operations of a water utility in general.
Yes.
Do you know if DIUC is required to have an air permit for emergency generators or fuel pumps?
Well, I know we're in complete compliance with our permits.
How often are emergency systems tested, and how is this documentation maintained?
Again, this is just secondhand information because it's outside my purview. But it's my understanding that the emergency generators are tested daily. I think they're run daily. So, they have to have fuel. I know there was a question yesterday about fuel tanks. Well, they're tested every day, so I'm sure the fuel's checked every day. They're run every day. And I'm not aware of any issues we have with any of the regulatory agencies, environmental agencies that say we're out of compliance with any of that.
And in the late filed exhibit, you identified the four persons that are responsible from a day-to-day on the island perspective and given us their names, correct?
Yes.
Do any of them live on the island?
I don't know where they live. I'm reasonably sure that there's at least one that lives on the island, but again, it's just secondhand knowledge.
And if there were a chlorine leak or a spill, how would that be addressed? In terms of if there may or may not be one person on the island that lives there, is there someone on the island? Is there an employee on the island? Always an employee on the island at any particular time?
Again, outside of my purview, I'm sorry.
And ORS noted that the number of customers had gone down. How does DIUC lose customers considering the availability charges?
I'm unaware that there's a number of customers that have decreased. I'm not.
So, okay, so what would happen if a property, if there was no owner, no, there would have to be an owner. I'm struggling
Let me just give you an example.
Okay.
Because I am familiar with, now that I think about it, several years ago, a few years ago, there was a real estate development, it wasn't really a development company, but a real estate holding company that had multiple lots. One of the things they did was they started combining lots, saying that we only want one service for these two lots. So there was a decrease in the number of customers, availability of customers, because of that combination of, joining lots. That's the only thing I can think of. If there's a vacant lot owned that becomes an active lot, of course it just changes from a availability customer to an active customer. So the total number of customers should stay the same unless there are circumstances like I mentioned where they started combining lots and making it, a 2-acre lot as opposed to a 1-acre lot, just as an example.
That makes sense. Are there circumstances where customers disconnect and go from being base level payments to only having service, only paying for availability?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. And my final question has to do with the 4 employees and the licensure that Commissioner Caston talked about. What are the goals for these 4 employees? You've mentioned several times that there was a long-term employee that is no longer on this list. So I mean, I understand people change and so the question is just, what are your goals for this level of licensure?
Well, again, this really falls under Michael Guastella, but again, secondhand.
Thank you.
I know that one of the 2 unlicensed employees is within days, I believe, of completing his certification. So he has gone through all the testing for certification for water and sewer. The 4th employee is brand new. I don't even know his name, to be honest with you, because he's been hired within the last couple weeks, and I have not met the man, talked to the man, or addressed the man, so I don't know his name.
And my question is, what's the goal for the licensure for
Well,
these?
the goal for any utility is to have licensed operators at the level that is required by the environmental agencies that supervise or regulate that piece of it. And again, you talk about level A, B, C, D. In many instances, you're not required to have a level A. So I guess our goal would be to make sure that we are in compliance with the regulatory agencies and their requirements. Whether it requires an A, a B, a C, or a D, we want to be in compliance.
And do you know what that requirement is? Is there a level requirement, or is it just that you get to that D level and?
Well, the requirements change with the size of the utility, but I don't have personal knowledge of what level is required for certain levels of number of customers or size of utilities or.
And I'm just asking for your utility.
I'm sorry.
I'm just asking for your utility, for your management of the Daufuskie Island utility. What?
Again, the operations piece of it is Mike's, not mine. I don't know what the permitting requirements are.
Thank you. I appreciate your patience and your willingness to
You're welcome.
go at bat.
I hope I answered your questions.
Mr. White, we've been going about an hour and 45 minutes. Let's take
Is that all?
Yeah. Why don't we take a 15-minute break? I don't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but let's stretch our legs a little bit. We'll
Okay.
be back at let me find a clock that I can read. Let's come back at 11:32. 11:32, please. Good morning and welcome back to the Public Service Commission and the continuation of the hearing in docket 2022-142-WS, the rate case application filed by Daufuskie Island Utility Companies Incorporated. Let me explain. We had a little longer break than anticipated, but council asked for a little time to have some discussions, which we certainly granted, and that's why we were a few minutes late coming back. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Mr. White is still on the stand, and we are still in commissioner questions for the witness. Commissioner Caston?
Thank you. Mr. White, I wanted to follow up on, I guess, a comment or question during Commissioner Carolee Williams' questions. In the conversation about generators, I think you said you were certain that they were tested every day. Is that correct?
Again, it's secondhand knowledge, but I've been told, I haven't seen them test every day, but I've been told that they're tested every day, ran every day.
And who told you that? Who were you told that by?
Michael Guastella.
Is there, do you know if there's a requirement to run them every day?
I do not.
Do you know if they're tested under load?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if they're ever tested a run under load?
I do not.
Okay, I guess. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Good morning, or good afternoon. Well, still morning, Mr.
Still
White.
good morning.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have some questions from.
Oh, excuse me, Commissioner Irvin. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Well, morning.
Still morning, that's right. Thank you for correcting me. Let's go back in time, if you will, to the period where ORS told your utility company that they no longer owned the property, the water tower, because it had been sold for taxes. Do you recall about when did you first learn of that?
You know, I really don't recall.
What was the first notice that you had about losing the property to a tax sale? Did it come from the Office of Regulatory Staff? Is that when you first learned of it?
That's my understanding. I wasn't told personally, but Mr. Guastella said that he first received that information from ORS staff, and I then received it from Mr. Guastella.
Okay. What, if anything, did you do next after learning of that fact?
Well, Mr. Guastella outlined that yesterday, and Mr. Guastella and our legal team took care of that. I personally did not.
Well, so are you telling us you didn't do anything?
I personally did not get involved in the remedy of that situation.
What is your job title with the utility?
I'm the Director of Accounting and Finance for Guastella Associates.
And as Director of Accounting and Finance, it didn't concern you enough to inquire further as to how to resolve the matter?
I had experts doing it for me. Mr. Guastella and our legal team are sufficient, certainly, experienced and capable people of handling that without my assistance.
Who was on your legal team?
the law firm of Walker, Gressett, and there's another I can't remember off the top of my head.
Did you have any direct communications with them about this issue?
About that particular issue?
Yes, sir.
No.
Well, certainly you must have opened the file because you're responsible for, as an accountant, for the utility, taking care of unpaid bills, correct?
That falls under my supervision, yes.
Right. So I'm sure you immediately contacted the county treasurer's office and made an inquiry, correct?
No, like I said, Mr. Guastella and the law team worked on resolving the issue. I had no influence on it whatsoever or participation in it.
When did you come to learn that it had been resolved?
What hasn't been resolved?
It has not been resolved.
The issue of the land at the water tank has not been resolved.
No, the unpaid taxes, apparently they were unpaid for several years. Is that correct?
Oh, the unpaid tax situation. I'm sorry. I thought you were referring to the taxes on the water tower land. The back paid taxes, again, was negotiated between Mr. Guastella, the law firm, and the county, Beaufort County tax collector.
And so do you have any file or paperwork as to how it was negotiated and resolved?
Again, Mr. Guastella and the law firm negotiated a settlement with the county. I just make sure that county is paid.
What do you have in your office and in your files, on your database, to reflect what occurred, what actually occurred?
Oh, well, we set it up as a payable on the books and records of the utility, and as we pay it, we reduce that liability. It's recorded on the books.
How is it recorded on the books?
It's recorded on the books as a miscellaneous accrued liability on.
All right, and so is it identified in any other way?
No, it's just in that account.
What is the amount of the liability?
Currently, it stands at about $87,000.
So you're still making payments over a period of years on that liability, is that correct?
Correct.
Is it really fair for the ratepayers of the utility to have to bear that cost?
Well, I believe it is. They would. Any other property tax is paid through the rates. I mean, the rates recover the cost of property tax. It's appropriate utility accounting.
But your responsibility as the accountant is to see that the taxes are timely paid so there'll be no penalties and there'll be no tax sale. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And you failed to do that.
Excuse me?
You failed to do that in this case. Taxes weren't paid, the utility property was sold, You didn't find out about it until the Office of Regulatory Staff told you. Is that right?
And when we were notified that there were tax bills that were not mailed to us properly, we resolved the issue with the county tax people.
Where were they mailed to? What address were they mailed to?
I have no idea, but it didn't come to our utility company.
You weren't curious about where the bills were sent?
No, well, we were paying some tax bills. I don't think anybody realized there was missing tax bills. It wasn't like we were paying nothing. We were paying tax bills, but there were tax bills that were missing.
Let's move on to another topic that was mentioned earlier in your testimony. You were asked about the Tax Cuts and Job Act. As an accountant, you're aware of that federal legislation that became effective January 1st of 2018. Is that right?
That's correct.
And isn't it true that that act reduced the federal corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%?
It did.
And these new federal requirements affected the current tax expenses and deferred tax accounting methods used by water utilities like yours, correct?
There is the deferred tax calculations performed, yes.
That's right. And were you aware that the Office of Regulatory Staff came to the commission in March of that year and asked in a filing that the Public Service Commission of South Carolina require all utilities to calculate and defer the effects resulting from the Tax Act starting January 1st of 2018. You knew that, didn't you?
The answer to that is yes, I was aware of it. I didn't follow through necessarily. It just kind of got past me.
It got past you?
So to speak, yes.
Well, you're the one that, you've already testified, you're the one that provides your outside of CPA, an accounting firm with the utility accounts. Is that correct?
We have an outside CPA firm that does our taxes, performs our taxes, files our taxes.
Is it part of your responsibility to be familiar with, since you have two utilities in South Carolina, is it part of your responsibilities to be familiar with the rules and regulations of the South Carolina Public Service Commission?
I do the best I can to be familiar with regulation.
Okay. So you must be aware that on April the 25th, 2018, this commission had an order filed that required all utilities that are regulated by the commission to begin, as of January 1, 2018, making regulatory accounting treatment for any impacts of the new law, including current and deferred tax impacts. You knew that, right?
I knew of the tax change. I knew that there would be a difference in the taxes. I don't know that I was personally familiar that I read the order completely. I was familiar with different regulators treating it differently and asking for different treatment of that tax law.
Right, and as a result of the tax law changes, you knew that you should begin tracking and deferring the effects resulting from the Tax Act in a regulatory liability account, right? That's what's required by the commission order, by the way. And so my question to you is, why didn't you do that?
It just didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
No,
Well-
I did not set up a separate account accounting for the difference in the tax impacts.
Well, since it is a part of a commission, order, you wouldn't have any problem with going back and making an accounting adjustment to be fair to your ratepayers that gives them credit, as required by our commission order, for the difference between, the two numbers. You wouldn't have any problem with that, would you?
Well, I've acknowledged the fact that there are two different rates, tax rates, and there would be an impacted.
And it'd be only fair to customers. In fact, the commission ordered that all utilities in South Carolina
Okay, well, again,
do so. So I guess that includes yours, right?
we are located in South Carolina, the Daufuskie Island, yes.
I'd like to request a late file exhibit, Madam Chair, which requires this, utility to comply with our order number. Let's see if I can find it here. It's order number 2018-308, which is the commission directive that we've been discussing. I'd like to have an accounting of what the customers are due under that particular commission order. Late filed exhibit, once the calculations have been made.
Commissioner, you're asking for an exhibit that would tell the amount of that, regulatory
We
liability?
can do it a couple of different ways. We're gonna need to, first, we're gonna have to, the company's gonna have to do the calculation. He's aware of the numbers and he's aware of his responsibility that he admits that he didn't do. So either the Office of Regulatory Staff can do the calculation. In fact, I think that might be the best way to go. We could ask the Office of Regulatory Staff, since they're very familiar with it. We've done it in every utility that's come before us since this order was filed. And let's just ask the ORS to enter a late filed exhibit with the effective return to ratepayers.
If I may,
Just a moment, Commissioner Irvin, I'm not sure ORS can make that calculation because they don't have the full books and records of the utility to do that. But Mr. White, what are you trying to say?
I believe I've seen a schedule that ORS put together that shows exactly the tax
Okay.
difference.
All right, they've already done that? You've seen
Yes.
that? Okay. Have you,
Do you have a copy of that?
I don't have it with me, I don't believe.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Who's-
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Knowles,
it's Alex
thank
Knowles
you.
for ORS. Commissioner Urban, you might refer to Daniel Sullivan's Exhibit 9, which calculates the excess tax. There are other items associated with ADIT and other more complicated items that ORS hasn't calculated, but the amount of excess tax ORS has calculated.
that's Mr. Sullivan's direct Exhibit 9?
Yes, ma'am.
Have the parties reached an agreement on how that's to be treated?
Council, can y'all answer that question? Mr. Gressett, Mr. Knowles, has there been any agreement on the treatment of that?
No, sir, not yet.
Thank you.
Okay, well, since there's no agreement, we will need a copy of the, if it's not in the record, we'll need make sure that it's part of our record. Is it a part of our record now already?
Mr. Sullivan hasn't testified yet, but if the calculation is in his exhibits, then it will be coming in.
In the unlikely event he does not testify, I would like to.
I don't
reserve
think I don't think it's gonna happen that he doesn't testify. If something happens to Mr. Sullivan, someone will be adopting his testimony, Commissioner.
Thank you.
It'll come in.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you.
Mr. White, I have a few. Mr. White, I'm looking at your rebuttal exhibit GCW1 Schedule A4. If you would like to take me through some of my questions on that. This is going to be the corrected exhibit, but I'm not asking about the correction here.
Okay. I've got the exhibit.
Let me just, does the, let me just clarify something on the property tax issue. Are there two separate issues? One being the tax sale of the water tower property, but then there were other tax bills that did not get to the utility, and so that was the settlement with Beaufort County. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's two
Okay.
separate issues.
All right. Let's talk about the settlement with Beaufort County.
Okay.
And that was for several, first of all, what is now Daufuskie Island Utility? Some of that, what is the current utility? Part of that came out of a bankruptcy sale. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But that's not the entire utility system.
No.
There were two utility systems out there.
There were two utility systems, the Hague Point system and the Melrose Bloody Point system, two separate systems that merged into Daufuskie Island Utilities.
But only the Melrose utility system was the one in bankruptcy.
Correct.
And with regard to what became Daufuskie, what records did y'all get from regarding the utility that was in bankruptcy, the Hague Point?
We got scant records, but we got the records of the plant costs that were approved in their rate filings, which I think dated back to 2004 or thereabouts, was their last rate filing. And we assumed that the costs that were recorded on the Melrose books and adjudicated in their last filing were approved and legitimate costs.
So when y'all talk about that those were per book numbers, I think, and this is coming into that 699,000 and change. Those were from those books of that utility that went into bankruptcy and came, and then came.
The majority of those costs, yes.
Okay. But those were per book numbers, is that correct?
They were recorded on the company's books and records,
Okay.
some of which were supported with, support information, invoices and that kind of thing. But many of the invoices and many of the plant assets were installed, 30 years before we ended up taking over, or the Daufuskie Island ended up taking over the Melrose system.
And that Melrose system, was that a developer installed and owned system
I believe it was.
at the
but
time that it was built and started providing service?
I believe so, yes.
And at some point, did the Property Owners Association have it, or was that still the developer? You don't know?
I don't know.
That's fine. If I ask a yes/no question, you can answer yes, no, or I don't know, and then explain.
Okay.
But if I ask a yes/no question, I do like a yes, no, or I don't know, okay? And I don't know if I've got any more of those. But so when we're talking about the $699,000, and I think it's been referred to as unamortized balances from rate base, and also utility plan and service, is that correct?
Well, it's not unamortized
Okay.
balance of.
That's the utility plant and service dispute.
Correct.
Disputed amount, or one of them.
Correct.
Okay. That number came from those books of that bankrupt utility that once Daufuskie took over, just transferred those numbers as the rate base. Part of it.
That's right.
It was more than
Yes.
that, but that amount is still in dispute.
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell me what comprises that $699,000? That might be, we might need to refer to your, I thought I had it on one schedule. Do you know what the disputed assets are that pertain to that 699,000?
I do have the detail. Now, what I did do was summarize, like we spoke about earlier, on those W-B
Okay.
point 2 and point 3
Can you,
schedules show the accounts and the amounts in dispute. Doesn't specify the exact assets.
well, the accounts might help me. I mean, are we talking mains? We talking,
We are.
lift stations? What, and give me that schedule again, please. Oh, there it is. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
Okay, if we, for example, if we look at Schedule W-B2,
Right.
that's the utility plant and service water. What I've started with is the original cost of plant as we have booked it
All right.
at Daufuskie Island. Then there's a box, and that box says ORS adjustments. These are the total adjustments, total costs that have been rejected by ORS as undocumented. And I put it under the specific dockets that where the judgments were made. After the box, I've put the adjustments, the amounts that we accept. For example, in organizational costs, going back to the 2005 docket, that docket eliminated $20,000 of organizational costs. I'm not familiar enough with that 2005 docket, but we decided that we would accept that. In a compromise, we would accept that adjustment of reducing organizational costs by $20,000.
Let me ask you a question. That 2005 docket, was that in the name of Daufuskie Island Utilities or
I believe that was
Melrose?
Melrose.
That was the, okay, thank you. Please, can you go on through those for me?
So then under docket, the 2011 docket and 2014 docket, those numbers remain contested numbers. Those dockets were also settlements. So there was no order saying we had to, those costs should be eliminated. They were deemed by ORS staff to be undocumented. Because an invoice is missing doesn't mean it's undocumented cost. If you see a building out there and you know the building exists and the building is used and useful in the operation of the utility, it can't be valued at zero. And that's what staff basically has done, or our staff has done, with some of these costs. Because there's not an invoice, the cost doesn't exist.
Well, tell
We
me.
disagree with that approach.
Okay, tell me about the $99,000 in docket 2022. That's this docket, 142. Do you know what that is removing?
Yes, that is removing projected costs of some of the capital improvements we anticipated for 2022.
Okay, those have not been made yet, is that correct?
They had not been made at the time that we filed. So staff said, if they haven't been made, it's not known and measurable, we're eliminating those adjustments.
Have those been made subsequent to the filing of this docket?
There has been, some of the costs have been incurred.
Okay, do you know the amount?
Yes.
And what is that?
The-
That have been made and are used and useful?
That have been made, yes. There's, in the column that says adjustments to ORS, there's an amount of $11,672. And in the pro forma adjustment column is $19,279. Those are for amounts that, the first amount was incurred and invoiced prior to me filing this document, but I didn't have it in front of me at the time. And the 19,000 have been invoiced since we filed this on June 21st or whatever the filing date was. Date of the application.
Okay, there has been invoices for 19,000. And
Yes.
that is for completed improvements that are actually in service
Yes,
and being used. Has
yes,
that documentation been provided to ORS?
it has.
Okay. So do you know their position on that 19,000?
Not for sure.
Okay, I'll follow up with ORS. With regard to, when it said the column adjustments to ORS, what does that mean? To ORS? I'm not,
Well, that meant that, ORS has since seen those invoices, and I believe they've accepted them.
okay.
But at the time of the filing, those invoices were not available.
Okay. So how much of that utility plant and service that started out as $699,000 is still in dispute? Do you know?
I don't know the number. It's 300 and some thousand, 383 or something like that, I believe is the
Okay.
number.
And when you tell me that is showing in these accounts, there's not a breakdown of how much was from water mains or sewer mains or structures.
Yes, if you follow these across,
Well, I'm having trouble. I have trouble. I need a ruler or something, 'cause I can't follow the line. Well, like the $81,000 from docket 2011-229, is that under structures?
yes,
Okay. What structure is that? Do you know?
I believe that's the structure of the water plant. Melrose structure. I'm hard pressed to.
Okay. Well, if that is in plant, is there also depreciation being accumulated on these disputed amounts?
Yes,
So is DIUC continuing to depreciate these and
we are.
and the recording that lower value as rate base? Is that going through the
Yes.
normal? Okay. I'll
I
follow.
might add that if you look at Schedule W-B.3, that's the accumulated depreciation and the adjustments made by ORS on those as well. But I assure you, those assets are still on the utilities books and being depreciated.
Okay. Now, let's go back to your Schedule A2 that I first referenced, if you don't mind. Excuse me, A4, the corrected exhibit. With regard to the questions about I'm headed back to I digressed and I apologize. With regard to the tax liability, the settlement with Beaufort County, and that was amortized over, was it 8 years?
8 years, yes.
Okay. And where are we in that 8-year period?
I think we have 1 year left.
And that's why when you say there's $87,000 after this year, that should be paid. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Does that $87,000 tax liability, I'm gonna call it a tax liability because you owe it, does that show up in the operating statement under property taxes, or is that something separate?
No, it does. The annual payments of those deferred taxes, the expense shows up as a property tax on the operating statement.
So when I look at, let's see, well, down where it says property taxes right above payroll taxes, that
Yes.
amount is included in that
Correct.
200 and something $1,000.
Yes.
Okay. I think you've answered some of this, because when I go down to below the revenue increase and I see utility plant and service on
Yes.
that, and year end at the end of the test year was 9.1 million, and then it comes over as proposed. I think I was trying to take 699,000 and I couldn't make those numbers come out. So that's where you're saying that 699,000 has been reduced by agreement on some of those plant.
Correct.
Okay. I couldn't get that to come out, so that was a problem there. Okay. Can we look at your rate case expense exhibit? I think this is the one that Mr. Pringle went over, and I think it's your rebuttal GCW2. And I like to use the term buckets as well, okay? And I think of these as buckets of, say, the 2014 rate case. Now, I think y'all may include in that 2014 rate case the buckets of the appellate cost too, but I kind of have smaller buckets, okay?
Correct.
Okay. And am I correct that let's just look through this a little bit. The amount in dispute here is the amount of the ongoing portion, the appellate part, dealing with the reparations appeal, which is still open at the South Carolina Supreme Court. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Has there been a agreement with the utility and ORS on the rate case expenses from the 2014 docket for things that don't include the current open appeal?
Yes, there is
Okay.
an agreement.
All right.
We agree with the amounts.
So that includes the initial case before the PSC, the first appeal, the remand case before the PSC, the second appeal, and the settlement before the PSC. Those amounts are closed off. Y'all have agreed on those. Is that correct?
We do.
Okay. Walk me through the bottom part of that schedule, if you would. The updated cost through September 30th.
Yeah, we've been asked by staff to keep rate case expenses updated as the invoices are issued. We filed this application in June, so I only had invoices covering costs through the end of May. So.
And there's been work going on. I think they're still in the
absolutely.
briefing.
We've answered.
They're still in the
some
briefing
400
case at the
interrogatories.
appeal. And then, okay, y'all had estimated amount of rate case expenses for this case. Is that right?
When we filed it, we estimated $400,000 for the
Okay.
rate case costs, including our costs, legal costs, et cetera.
So those updated costs, the first is the 2014 docket.
That's right, there's still,
And all of those costs of the 29,000 from Gastel and Associates and the 26,000 to the law firm, those are all based on the reparations appeal. Is that correct?
yes, that would be correct.
Okay. And then the second bold for the current docket, the 2022-142, those are updated rate case expenses for this case that you filed in June and we're here hearing today.
That's correct, that's docket 2022-142, WS.
Okay. I think that helps me on that. Have y'all agreed on an amortization time frame on rate case expenses?
Yes, we agree with staff's recommendation of 3 years.
Okay. Are you familiar? I just want some clarif. Are you familiar with the term a distressed utility?
I'm sorry?
Are you familiar with the term distressed utility?
Yes.
Does that only apply to where the plant is in disrepair and maybe not up to what it should be, or does it also apply to a utility that is not getting the revenue it needs to do the operations as it should?
My understanding is a distressed utility means that they're in bad shape, whether it be financial or physical.
Would you consider DIUC a distressed utility?
I think distressed is probably too strong a term.
Okay.
It's-
Challenged?
Pardon me?
Challenged?
It has been a challenged utility.
Okay. On a couple of rate case items, I think it was, I'm gonna say his name wrong, Mr. Heppel or Herpel, that indicated, I believe in his rebuttal testimony, or maybe it's sir rebuttal. Have you had a chance to review ORS's sir rebuttal testimony?
I have reviewed all the testimony. I really focused on Mr. Sullivan's.
Okay. But I think in response to some, it would have been sir rebuttal, because in response to some of the invoices that you included in your exhibits, there was an indication that some of them appeared to be duplicative work. Have you had a chance to review those?
Yes, I did a cursory review. Some of them, one of them is it's not a duplicate. The number got duplicated somehow, the number of the invoice.
I think it was
the work was
something
not
70, 270, 670, something 70.
570 or
something.
I think it was 570 actually.
Okay.
Wasn't duplicative work. Somehow the invoice number got duplicated. I don't know if I don't know what happened exactly, but the number got picked up on two different invoices.
Have you reviewed those invoices?
Again, cursory, I looked at the invoices and said, oh, this work's not the same. The amounts aren't the same. How come the numbers are the same? So I had the same questions that anybody else would, looking at two invoices that contain everything different except for the number.
Okay. All right. I think that's all I have, Mr. White. Thank you very much. Appreciate your question.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything further? Mr. Gressett, any redirect?
No, ma'am. Commissioner, but I do have a couple of motions or matters.
Okay. Mr. White, thank you for your testimony. You may, I would say you could still sit there if you wanted to, but
If I
Why,
could get some of those pillows, I would.
thank you very much. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Are we, let's see, is that your last witness?
Yes, Madam Chair, and I have a couple of matters to raise before
All right,
we
sir.
finish. It's
Could you
clear,
make sure that, is that microphone on? I don't see a light. I can't tell if it's on or not. It's on. They're telling me in the back it's on.
Okay. It's clear the commissioners have a significant interest in the facts surrounding the tax sale and then the tax settlement agreement with Beaufort County. Both of those matters were thoroughly litigated in the two previous cases. For purposes of the record, whether it's necessary or not, I have sort of two phases. One, I'd like to ask that the commission take judicial notice of the two previous opinions from the Supreme Court. My reason being that they provide factual findings that may be helpful, particularly with regard to the condemnation parcel. The opinion states that because the South Carolina, sorry, this is with regard to the settlement agreement. Because the state of South Carolina Department of Revenue did not initially recognize DIUC as a utility, it did not begin assessing the 10.5% utility property tax against DIUC until 2012. Thus, instead of receiving an expected property tax bill of approximately $10,000 in August 2012, DIUC received a bill for $132,000 with back taxes for 10 and 11 for $230,000. So this was the utility property tax that has to be paid. It comes from the Department of Revenue, but it's billed by the county, and it wasn't billed. Daufuskie then entered into an agreement with the county to pay that off over time. With regard to the tax sale, as Justice Hearn wrote, DIUC faced a second tax problem when the county sent one of its property tax bills to the wrong address. As a result, the tax was never paid, and Beaufort County initiated a tax sale proceeding. When referencing the proceedings below, the court goes on to talk about the testimony in the case presented by Beaufort County Treasurer. There was significant testimony about both of these in the initial case, and I think to some extent in the second. So my request is to make sure that the commission has all of the information it needs. We ask that the commission in this proceeding take judicial notice of the transcripts from the two previous proceedings in 2015-346, such that those facts are available to the commission. The orders we would ask the commission to take judicial notice of as orders.
The commission's orders.
The commission's orders and the Supreme Court orders with regard to the testimony that's in the record of that case. It could be cited by parties in proposed orders, reviewed by the commission, and would have whatever value the commission found for it.
Okay, you just said 2015-346. I
Yes.
thought there was a 2014 docket that gave rise to the.
Oh, sorry, I said it wrong. It was one of the orders is like 364, 365. You are correct. It is 2014-346.
WS, that's the
WS.
docket, and then the particular orders, which we ought to know by heart now, is 2015. I will,
They'll be in the docket.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there any objection
Well-
to the request for judicial notice?
Okay, no objection to the Supreme Court's opinion in what we call DIUC 1. That's, it is, no objection to the commission's orders that made findings of fact and conclusions of law based upon the record. Some heartburn about the actual record.
The transcript?
The transcript becoming part of it, because again, what we have, the results of those proceedings are the decisions, not the positions of the parties, not the back and forth. I certainly understand where Mr. Gressett is coming from, but I think as a general proposition, and I could be wrong about this, judicial notice is taken of decisions, as opposed to entire hearings. But again, you could, I'm not saying that I know but I think there's some potential peril in opening up the entire record and, the ability to cite something as opposed to something else, rather than something that the commission or the Supreme Court considered and became, findings of fact, or, were the subject of a proceeding that had both sides going back and forth, and then a decision that comes.
Mr. Mustian?
Madam Chair, we would echo Mr. Pringle's comments. I also, from the Office of Regulatory Staff's perspective, although we are the same agency, we have a different mission, statutory mission than we did back in 2014 and thereafter when those issues were litigated. There are different witnesses that are, the testimony is reflected in the transcript. They're different attorneys, and so we don't really know what questions we as an agency today, given our current statutory mission, what we may have asked, what we may have presented. In addition, being a agency with a different statutory mission, we may present different positions at this time as opposed to back then. So, like Mr. Pringle, I'm not entirely certain about this, but to me, it essentially seems to present a hearsay issue. I know transcripts can be admitted in when you're using it to impeach. I'm not aware of a situation where an entire transcript would come in as direct evidence when those witnesses arguably should be or can be available, and those types of things. So we would oppose that as well. We certainly would not, as Mr. Pringle said, do not object to the Supreme Court orders and the commission orders.
Mr. Grutz, any response?
So that it's,
Let me ask this. The two Supreme Court orders.
yes, ma'am.
The orders of the commission, and there are going to be several because there would have been an initial order, a reconsideration order, probably twice,
That's correct.
and then was there not a settlement order?
That's correct.
Does that not give a pretty good flavor of what happened in that docket?
The problem is, from our current position, is that the commissioners are asking questions about what happened with the tax sale, whether that implicates the utility was paying attention to things, who was responsible for things, who was minding the mail and other things. Those are not addressed in the settlement agreement. They are addressed in the commission's first order, but obviously it made findings that were contrary to our position,
Right.
went up on appeal, and there were limited findings buried in the
second
commission.
order.
The main thing I'm really thinking about, candidly, is not, I referenced the whole transcript so we wouldn't get in a problem where somebody was picking and choosing, but I just want the commission to be able to, I guess, have access to and use in this case, if they need, information from those dockets related to particularly these two issues of the tax sale and the tax settlement.
And
Mr. Gressett, I'm going to do a little research over the limited lunch break and come back and address. I don't see any problem, and we'll go ahead and say there we will take the two Supreme Court orders under judicial notice and the orders of the commission from docket 2014. I don't remember. 346 WS, the orders. But let me research a little bit on the transcript. Okay.
And if it's helpful, it's Commission Order 2015-846, which was issued in December of 2015 when I was 25. And the order on reconsideration was 2016-50. That was issued on February 25th, 2016. Then Order 2018-68 issued on January 31st, 2018.
I'm sorry, 2018.
Yeah, 2018-68.
Okay.
And then the order on reconsideration was 2018-346. And then if you want to throw in the
Settlement
third, the settlement, that would have been order number 2021-132 issued on March 30th, 2021.
And of course, I don't want to back us into a situation whereby using the phrase judicial notice, I'm asking, or it to be confused, that I'm asking the commission to re-find all the things that it found in those orders. This is for background information and factual information about these instances so that if the commission had additional questions, it could know where to look and that sort of thing.
Okay.
And my problem is, you know, in the first case, say the commission adopted a settlement agreement with 5 pretty harsh adjustments. There were obviously facts upon which it based its decision, and I just don't want those to circle back against us as if I'm asking that they be renewed. I just want to be sure the commission has what it needs.
I'm viewing this request as background on what has already transpired.
Correct.
As far as the water tower issue and the tax issue with regard to the 8 years, the settlement that resulted in the 8-year payback.
Yeah,
Is that?
I understand, understand the request, but again, just to finalize this, the concern is about.
Do you have a lavalier on, or can you make sure you're at a mic, please?
I'm on.
There you go.
I should have put the lavalier on, but the concern is that there's fact creep, or that you're looking at facts and circumstances and testimony that was given in a certain period of time, and then how that could affect, because the commission obviously has decisions to make. But I understand where Mr. Gressett is coming from, and I see, I recognize the approach, but I'm not sure that it's practically possible. But you consider do your research.
And you're addressing the transcript.
I'm addressing the transcript. The orders, I mean, they say what they say, and that's why we have judicial notice, is because it's something that's been sealed. It's the product of what the parties said, and then their findings of fact and conclusions of law that meet a standard of authenticity or reliability. But I understand where Mr. Gressett is coming from, but you all consider it, and then we'll.
I am a bit concerned about confusing the factual record that's before the commission in this proceeding.
In that
And I
case,
will tell you, I have that concern.
in that case, Madam Commissioner, I think that with regard to the previous orders and the Supreme Court orders, the parties could certainly cite to those, and nobody would be objecting to citing to the fact that an order says that or a Supreme Court order says that. So we probably don't have to have judicial notice of those. To the extent that there's information available in the transcript, it could be helpful to provide information to the commission, but I am happy to, so that we don't back ourselves into a situation where we're asking the commission to rule on a case and we've opened up another large record that could impact it, I'll just withdraw the request.
Thank you. I think that would be the cleanest way to go.
That's fine.
Protect
I'll
us
just withdraw
and
the
y'all.
motion. Thank you for letting me think through that out loud.
Thank you. Given the renewed motion for judicial notice, is there any objection? Limited to the Supreme Court orders and the orders of the commission from the 2014 docket.
I'll actually withdraw the whole motion.
I
The
don't
orders
mind.
can be cited as
Okay.
usual.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
They might be referred to.
I love these intellectual exercises. Thank you.
Well, again,
Sorry about that.
No, it's no problem.
It's a good heuristic.
It helps us all.
And the one last housekeeping item I have is, Mr. Guastella had some serious surgery, and throughout yesterday and today, it's been clear he needs to return home. If that's all right with the commission to release him to leave.
I tell every party that asks for a witness to be excused, you do so at your peril in case something were to come up. But we certainly wish Mr. Costello well. Thank you. He may leave if you excuse him, but that's your choice, Mr. Gressett.
And there's certainly no objection from the POAs on that front. Most witnesses that I cross leave the room without even asking. So
Does that complete your case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the 1 o'clock hour. I don't know that we have time to get into another witness. We will break for lunch and then for the commission business meeting. And I'm going to say we'll return at 2:45 if we are not quite finished with the commission business meeting at that point. Just bear with us. But we will now recess for lunch to return at 2:45. Thank you.